Now, the deep state is not the unelected bureaucracy that has some ties to the deep state. The deep state often uses the unelected bureaucracy because, you see, when you hire bureaucrats in the United States, they traditionally hire Democrats. They hire people who don't object to the federal government expanding its power. So they don't, you see, what makes a true deep stater, he knows there's a deep state secret hierarchy. He knows who's his boss. He knows who is up the chain. He may not know all the way up the chain, but he knows he's part of a conspiracy. The unelected bureaucracy does not. They're simply predictable leftists and liberals who deep staters can talk to and get to do things. But if Americans think that bringing manufacturing back is going to still give them cheap goods, they're fooling themselves. China, for example, does not have Social Security tax to pay on employers. They don't have workmen's compensation. They don't have union labor rates that Americans. So you bring factory back to the United States and the price is going to double. Well, the spacecraft were physical in the sense that they did crash and they didn't disappear. The U.S. took them away and stored it. So, but the beings themselves, if they can exceed the laws of physics in terms of inertia and speed and acceleration, etc., may be in the spirit realm.
All right, folks, welcome back to The Last Dispensation. You're living in it. I'm your host, Troy, and I'd like to also welcome back to the program Joel Skousen, who was recently at the firm conference. How did your presentation go? I missed you again.
Well, I gave my normal world affairs briefing at the firm foundation. It was to a packed house, so the reception was good.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Good job. Now, we were going to talk about tariffs, and I've got a few questions about that for you. I also wanted to talk to you about the shakeup with the DOJ and President Trump, and to get your feelings about that. Let's talk about the tariffs first, and then we can go into that. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I've got some negatives and I've got some positives as far as the tariffs are concerned. But my questions to you, you have argued, I know, that Trump underestimated China's determination not to back down. What alternative strategies, because I know you're not happy about these tariffs, you've got more negative feelings about them than positive. How could he have been more effective in negotiating with China? And why do you feel that the tariffs are a bad thing?
Well, first of all, you should never have trade with a communist country who's going to use that trade to build their military forces as an existential enemy. Now, this happened clear back at the Paris Peace Conference at the end of the Vietnam War, where Henry Kissinger, a globalist, actually gave, the North Vietnamese came to the conference ready to capitulate because the bombing of North Korea was devastating Hanoi. And what did Henry Kissinger do? He said to them, well, just give us 3 years before you take South Korea back and we'll, exit from Vietnam. And at the same time, which had nothing to do with the war with Vietnam, he took away Taiwan's seat in the UN and gave it to Red China, who had funded and supplied North Korea during the entire war with arms and material, and including Soviet ships as well. And he gave them not only a seat in the UN, but a seat on the Security Council with veto power like the Soviet states have. So that was the globalist building an enemy who didn't deserve it, of course, being fired. So that's how we started. And then it was Newt Gingrich in his contract with America, well, at least he got elected as Speaker of the House with a contract with America, which many of your listeners are probably too young to remember. But his first item of agenda when he got to be Speaker of the House as a Republican was to give China entrance into the World Trade Organization and most favored trading status. So he was also a wolf in sheep's clothing, a globalist promoting and helping China. Otherwise, China would be a backwater to this very day. They can't feed themselves. They had no manufacturing capability of any substance, and we helped them build that through trade. Now 80% of our consumer products in the United States are made in China. So they've got us over a barrel. We can't very well cut off trade for China. And that's essentially what 150, 145%, 150% tariff on Chinese goods coming in does. Even Walmart, incredibly, who sells, even though they say that barely half of our goods are made in China, nevertheless, made in China accounts for 80% of the sales at Walmart. So that's an important thing to remember. But they claim they're not going to raise prices. Well, how are you not going to raise prices when you're going to pay 1.5 times more for all Chinese goods coming in? And in fact, as we speak, Chinese goods are piling up in Chinese ports because people are canceling their contracts. They cannot afford to bring in the products and pay 1.5 times more than what they agreed to pay in U.S. tariffs. Now, I just don't, tariffs are a sales tax. They're a selective sales tax, and that's why I'm against them, because they only tax things that are imported. Historically, in the past 15 years or so, we've had tariffs down in the 2% range from other countries and reciprocal tariffs. And that's why trade has boomed in the United States, because of lack of tariffs. And Trump thinks he's going to finance all the things that he's got, like trips to Mars and building the casino city in Gaza Strip and other things with tariffs, and then even get away from the income tax on individual people below $150,000. Not going to happen, because you see, what happens with high tariffs like this is the economy starts to plummet. Because so many of the consumer items are made in China, you're going to have what we call stagflation. In other words, if people are right now buying Chinese goods because it's the cheapest thing on the market, and you raise those prices by 1.5 times or 150%, right, then people are not going to start buying. And a lot of jobs are based upon that trade, and you're going to have hundreds of thousands of jobs lost, even though you may save a few jobs. So that's why I'm against tariffs, except for existential enemies. And I think you ought to cut off trade, period. But you can't do that now without harming the economy. So what happens? Trump keeps changing his mind. He put on 25% tariffs on all imports, and then he raised it to 145% on China. And now he comes out this week and says, we're going to have a nice trade deal with China, and we're going to lower tariffs. And so the stock market goes up, like it always does when Trump changes his mind. He says, I'm going to give exemption for automobiles on trailers, Hyundai and Kia and Toyota and the other, and Honda. And the stock market goes booming. And then China comes out the next day, yesterday, and says, there's no trade negotiations with Trump. I don't know what planet he's on. In fact, they continue to tell other nations, don't make deals with Trump. We're going to play hardball. Well, they can't afford to play hardball in a certain extent, because they don't import much from the U.S. So their 125% raising of tariffs against U.S. imports doesn't help very much, except in a few cases where companies have to import. But it's a very minor trade imbalance there, or major trade imbalance, us importing 80%, them importing maybe 5% of their products, mostly food products, by the way, because China can't feed itself. So it's going to hurt American farmers' exports, as China seeks other things from Brazil and other BRICS countries. In other words, it's a mess, Troy, and Trump simply doesn't know what he's doing. And one of the unfortunate things about exemptions from trade is that if you're wealthy enough, if you're a billionaire, you get access to Trump. That's why Trump gave an exemption to Apple. Apple calls up and says, I want to talk to, Donald Trump, and he gets through. And so Trump gives an exemption to Dell Computers and Apple and the chip makers. But how about all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs who could also benefit and bring manufacturing back home, but they don't get an exemption because the little guy can't talk to Donald Trump. This is totally unfair. In fact, I put in last week's World Affairs Brief a video where Trump is in the way bragging with all of his billionaire friends. Here's Charles Schwab. He made 600 million the other day when the stock market went up, but I changed my mind. And here's so and so. He made $1 billion, and this, bragging in front of the world about making his billionaire friends wealthy because of changing his mind on tariffs and manipulating. That's insider trading because obviously those people knew before Trump announced to the world that they were getting an exemption. This is a mess, Troy.
Well, and I don't think that you are against reindustrializing the United States, because some are saying that that's the long-term theory, that we want to bring goods back, American goods, people to buy America. People are tired of even Walmart. Remember when people were saying that Walmart was taken away from the downtown, all the downtown mom and pop stops and the privately owned. And I don't think that you're not remembering that. I think what you're saying is we've been doing this for so long with China that there's a lot of long-term ills involved as well. It would take us a very long time to get back into just completely Americanizing and becoming economic. We don't want to become economic isolationists, but we do at the same time want to bring quality back to our goods. Because I mean, you admit too that the quality of the things that we consume from China are not as good as the things that we made in America 30 years ago, right?
Well, let me address that.
And
First of all,
and let me just sorry. Yeah. And there's going to be long-term pain when you're trying to reindustrialize things. Go ahead.
Well, that's right. But if Americans think that bringing manufacturing back is going to still give them cheap goods, they're fooling themselves. China, for example, does not have Social Security tax to pay on employers. They don't have workmen's compensation. They don't have union labor rates that Americans. So you bring factory back to the United States and the price is going to double. So it's not the cure-all for the consumer. Now, let me tell you that one of the reasons why the globalists wanted to promote trade with China was because it masked U.S. inflation. U.S. inflation has always been 7 to 9 to 10% every year for the past 20 years. And the consumer price index has been purposely manipulated downward to fool people into thinking that inflation was less than 3%. And it hasn't been, never has been. They've been lied to in the consumer price index. But what they've done is it would be even higher had they not allowed cheap goods. When you take 80% of your prices and you cut them in half, that's deflation. And deflation counterbalances the high inflation rate so that Americans don't feel it. And it also keeps the U.S. government from having to pay the COLA, which is cost of living allowance to Social Security recipients. That's an annual indexing to the rate of inflation. And that's why they had to manipulate the rate downward so they didn't have to pay trillions more dollars in Social Security recipients to pay for the rate of inflation. So we pay income tax on the rate of inflation. We pay property tax on an inflated price of our houses. Which is not a real raise in value of the house. It's just a reflection of the Fed printing more money. Now, so I want to dispense with that it's going to be a cure-all to bring manufacturing. Now, in terms of national security, this is the point that you're right on. It's important to have steel and aluminum manufacturing capabilities in the United States in case, of war and all of these types of things. And you can do that without, shall we say, harming free trade by, for example, mandating, all U.S., military suppliers have to deal in U.S. suppliers so that there's always a demand for higher priced U.S. steel. Remember, U.S. steel is the highest prices in the world because of union wages. Automobiles in the United States are the highest prices in the world because of union wages. And that's because of closed union shops. And we need to stop that. If you're going to allow American business to start to compete with world trade, you've got to allow wages to decrease as prices decrease. Union workers can afford to buy things still if you have cheaper prices through international trade. But when you have high union wages averaging $70,000 to $80,000 a year, um, and and cheap goods, they're really making about. Remember, unions are against other workers. They're not against employers. They're
Right.
against other workers who are willing to come and work for less. That's what unions are against. So I'm very anti-union in that regard. I mean, you can have unions as long as you don't have collective bargaining rights, meaning that you have to deal with a union and you cannot stop a company from hiring alternative workers. Then you can have unions, fine, but they don't have an advantage over the price of the free market. So,
Yeah.
what could Trump have done better? Well, in the first place, Trump should not have the power to determine willy nilly what the tariffs are going to be. And Congress has ceded the constitutional power. It's very clear, Article 5 of the Constitution, that Congress has the power to raise taxes, duties, and others, and tariffs are duties. So it's strictly a congressional thing. And Congress would not be able to switch and change tariffs on a whim like Donald Trump is doing, roiling the markets up and down every single day. And a lot of people, insiders, of course, are making a killing by shorting the market when it's going down and having advanced buy signals when it's going up. But there were three pieces of legislation since 1962, the Tariff Enhancement Act, which allowed the president to raise or lower tariffs when there was an issue of national security. That's when he raised tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, it saved 1,000 jobs in the United States when he did that, but it destroyed 75,000 jobs because of the higher price steel and aluminum required of that. And other companies then fired people because they couldn't make profits and had to switch. So you see, those are the hidden victims of tariff policies. Now, in 1972, there was the Tariff Act of 1974, giving the power of the president to mandate tariffs when there was unequal trade deals being made, meaning other countries were subsidizing their manufacturing so they could dump steel or dump products on our market at a cheaper price. And he could penalize them by raising tariffs. And that's what Trump has done in this. He's used the 1974 Act to induce these tariffs, claiming, wrongfully, by the way, the average tariffs in Europe are 68%, and in other countries are 48 and 59, but those are not true tariffs. He's making a calculation, or his economists are, including what they call of subsidies or tax deals. But the U.S. has the same things. The U.S. subsidizes U.S. agriculture to make its products cheaper to export to China. We subsidize steel. We subsidize aluminum. We have tax benefits and things. So this is a very complex thing to give the president power to do things. And then there's the latest Economic Emergency Powers Act, which gives him those dreaded emergency powers, which you can claim an emergency anytime you want and raise and lower tariffs. So if you think that Congress is going to be able to take back and undo those laws and get back the power to control tariffs, you're kidding yourself, because Trump won't sign it. He wants these emergency powers. He wants to be able to dictate these things. And it truly is creating havoc. Can you imagine, since this started, Troy, every company accountant, every accountant and every supplier within major corporations and even small companies was having to now recalculate prices and suppliers of how to get around these tariffs. And then Trump changes it a week later. And then he changes it back another week. And then he gives an exception. I mean, who's paying for all of this turmoil in the market? Who's paying for that? Nobody's paying for that. This is just absolutely insane to have a president doing that.
Well,
and what it has done is destroyed trust within the international market. But what do we count on with America? We can't count on anything with Trump, except that he is correctly, and I'm a big fan of his undoing all the DEI and all of the discrimination and the other things, the pro-leftist stuff and the trans. I'm all for that. But you see, as I pointed out in my speech to the Fern Foundation, Trump is a bull-headed bull in a china closet. And when he's right, and it's wonderful. And when he's wrong, he's terrible, and it's destructive to the economy. And on two major areas, Trump is really wrong. One is tariffs and domestically, and the other is in foreign policy. He's going to be a disaster in foreign policy because he doesn't understand the conspiratorial forces of communism in the world, Russia, China, and North Korea. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of his economists have said that, it is a economic war that he basically declared against China. But let's kind of end on this part because I want to get into the DOJ. But do you feel that eventually there's going to be there has to be a silver lining as far as eliminating too much dependence on Chinese goods and imports, even the national security implications involved there, continuing to deal with them? I mean, look at TikTok and all that junk. Do you feel that eventually it's necessary to wean ourselves off of them?
Yeah, I do. I do, but it can be done without tariffs. It can be done by
Right.
simply saying this is an existential enemy, and we're going to start to ban certain products related to national security,
Yeah.
and we're going to
Like
start
you
to
were
wean
saying.
Americans, off of these things. I mean, the U.S. could have done this years ago when China started to require all companies that did business in China to give over their trade secrets. They should have right then said, all cut off of trade until you stop that, you know, but they
Yeah.
didn't. And that's because behind every advisor and every president is a globalist who's out there building enemies to create World War III. And that's one of the reasons why Henry Kissinger did this to China. And he did it for the Soviet Union. After Lend-Lease, we made Russia a nuclear power by giving them the plans to the nuclear weapons. We gave them the first shipment of enriched uranium. They didn't know how to enrich uranium. We gave them the miniature ball bearing technology during the Republican Nixon administration to MIRV their missiles. So they had multiple warheads on missiles. None of that was possible before we gave them the technology. So conservatives have to understand this has been a globalist intent to build enemies through trade and through direct giveaways and through allowing them to steal technology from the United States. And now China's very big. They're bigger in AI than we are in the United States. Now, I don't think it's an exponential threat, AI, because, World War III is looming, and World War III is going to end all of the sophisticated, high tech, weapons and other things that, right now are very prominent. When you lose electricity during a world war of major destruction, you're not going to be able to manufacture high tech stuff. And it's going
Right.
to revert. We're going to revert to a very low tech society.
I know you brought that up before, and it makes too much sense, right? All right, let's get into the DOJ. I wake up this morning and I'm seeing some stuff about, are we going to clean house? I know Trump in the past, his last administration, he made promises. He wasn't able to keep them because I believe that, Biden got there by cheating, not on his own. He had,
Right.
basically for 4 years, our country was ran by oligarchs and autocrats outside of the United States of America, maybe inside too. Who knows?
No, it was run by the deep state, deep inside the United States.
Okay.
They were
All right.
they were
Which is
dictating
still
everything. Biden was just a puppet.
right.
He didn't decide anything.
And then they realized that their puppet strings were broke and they needed to get another puppet. But that same deep state is still tied with the globalist deep state. I mean, they're all kind of the same thing, right? So,
Well, the deep state is the enforcement arm of the larger globalist conspiracy.
right. Okay, that's right. We should separate the term deep state from uh, when we say deep state, we're talking about within the United States of America, right?
Well, actually, every Western country has its own deep state
Its own deep state, but it's a
because
national thing.
The United States has infiltrated every intelligence agency in the Western world, and so they have their own deep state. It's very, very deeply connected, but they're intertwined. They're not separate. Now, the deep state is not the unelected bureaucracy that has some ties to the deep state. The deep state often uses the unelected bureaucracy because you see, when you hire bureaucrats in the United States, they traditionally hire Democrats. They hire people who don't object to the federal government expanding
Right.
its power. So they don't, you see, what makes a true deep stater, he knows there's a deep state secret hierarchy. He knows who's his boss. He knows who is up the chain. He may not know all the way up the chain, but he knows he's part of a conspiracy. The unelected bureaucracy does not. They're simply predictable leftists and liberals who deep staters can talk to and get to do things
They're
without
just
them understanding there's a
convincible. They're
conspiracy.
convincible. They're
Yeah,
swayable. And they
that's
don't
right.
need to get in. They don't need to get deep inside because they've already got them controlled,
That's right. Yeah,
right? Because they're following the narrative. They're just
that's
following
right.
the agenda. So
Yeah.
let me ask you this, because I want to get into this the last till we're done today, because I have some questions about that. First of all, uh, what do you feel? I want you to tell me your feelings about the shakeup. Do you feel that it's sincere? First of all, go ahead.
All right. Well, there's something more to be said here. The official narrative, even from the Trump administration, doesn't make sense. Even from Pete Hegseth, it doesn't make sense. Dan Caldwell, his personal top advisor, was escorted out of the Pentagon for supposedly leaking things, and he
Mm-hmm.
went on Tucker Carlson and said it's all baloney. I didn't leak anything. I'm a faithful guy, to Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration. And he says it's a war going on in the DOD with the old guard that's still in there trying to get rid of us. And I think that's true. But you see, with Caldwell and Carroll and another guy, I forgot his name, Stewart, I think, who got ousted, these were Hegseth people. My question is, why did Pete Hegseth let them be escorted out of the pen? Why didn't he stop it? That's the big question. These were his people. These are not, as he got on Fox News and said, there's a war on here and the people are trying to undermine me. That doesn't explain why Dan Caldwell was thrown out of the Pentagon. He was a pro Hegseth person. So you see, there's something going on there that I don't understand is why Hegseth did not stop the purge that was going on of his own people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, some people are saying that it's not a true weakening of the deep state. That there could even be some entrenching, replacing of just other deep state characters. How do you feel about that?
Well, remember, Donald Trump doesn't even know who really is the deep state, and I don't think Hegseth knows. Remember that ISIS and Al Qaeda have always been deep state operations. They were the ones that funded those. They use Israel intelligence to train the Arab Israelis that become the terrorist leaders, but they have to hire all kinds of legitimately jihadists from
Mm-hmm.
Tunisia and from Libya and all the other places where they create havoc and overthrow governments in order to enhance this jihadist uh, uprising. So most of the terrorists, as you don't understand, at the top level, they're controlled by Israel and the deep state. And I can tell you that Hegseth doesn't know in the deep state who's running ISIS. He doesn't know. Trump doesn't know. The intelligence people, there are deep state people that know, and they're still there.
Are we
They have
talking?
not been limited.
Are we talking the CIA?
They're in the CIA, of course.
Okay.
But you see, they're white guys in the CIA. There are gray guys in the CIA who know that there's some legal actions, but they're not allowed to touch it because it's compartmentalized. And then there are true deep staters who do all the illegal acts. And that's what Kennedy went after and was going to try to destroy. People like George Bundy on his own staff who
Right.
canceled the air support. But you see, the deep state is very, very powerful, very, very strong. They have their own separate hierarchy. It's
Okay. That's
Trump can Trump can change who he wants to, but DNI Gabbard doesn't know who's the deep
well.
state.
Even John Radcliffe being the head of the
He doesn't
CIA.
know.
Right. Right.
He's
So
gonna he's gonna
that's what I
deal with the
wanted
white side. He's
to.
gonna deal with the white side of the CIA, and the dark side's gonna keep doing what they want to do.
Right. It's not based on real hierarchy. In other
That's
words, you've
it's
got a
two
middle
separate
guy
hierarchies.
that could be calling the shots in the CIA and no one would
There's
even
two
know it.
separate hierarchies going on in government. There's an official one, and then there's the unofficial, undercover, secret hierarchy.
Yeah. I mean, do you still have groups like how is the Council on Foreign Relations even influencing anything anymore? Are they still a powerhouse? Or are they still a think tank that influences the the CIA and even the NSA?
Well, the CFR is the propaganda arm of the larger globalist conspiracy. Remember one of the big CFR guys named Gardner used to say, the Americans are going to get out of national sovereignty by hook or by crook or by force. We're going to force them out of it. I mean, so they are clearly talking about the globalist agenda, getting us into wars, building enemies, and the CFR subtly promotes these. They all during the Cold War they were soft on the Soviet Union. Oh, let's use containment. Let's not confront them. We don't want to have a nuclear war. They're the ones that talked John F. Kennedy into giving away our intermediate missiles in Turkey in exchange for getting the Russians to get their missiles out of Cuba. The American public doesn't know that. That we got the missiles out, but we gave away a lot more in terms of pro-Russia stuff. And we
Right.
guaranteed. Kennedy signed with Khrushchev, says we will never overthrow the communist government of Cuba. We guaranteed that poor Cuba would never be liberated, thanks to Kennedy.
Yeah.
So you see, that was not a success.
Well, that definitely wasn't the Italian mafia
No.
took him out. That's a bunch of crap.
Well, but the mafia did provide the hitmen on the grassy knoll. And because the CIA has an incestuous relationship with the mafia, you do our hits for us so we don't get caught, and we'll protect your higher leaders.
Yeah.
We may prosecute some of the lower level people, but
make it look like thugs did it. Let's make it look like thugs did it.
Yeah.
Right?
And none of that has come out in the JFK files. So you know that they're hiding that.
They are. Okay, Tulsi Gabbard, she is head of the she's director of national intelligence. Do you think that what she's doing is going to, this crackdown, I guess, on national security, would that risk suppressing legitimate whistleblowing? Is that something she should be, I don't know, is it wise?
Well, let me tell you this. What she's cracking down on, she's not letting any of the traditional intelligence folks, the establishment, brief Donald Trump anymore. It's only people feeding Trump what he wants to believe about the war in Ukraine, about Ukraine being responsible and guilty for it, and Russia is innocent and attacking Ukraine. All that stuff's coming from alternative views that she's providing here to make Trump happy. But you see, the conservatives and Trump don't understand that the deep state has to switch sides and be on the right side of the World War III, meaning they got to be against Russia, because Russia and China are going to be, starting World War III after we provoke it in the war with Taiwan. But you see, so that Trump is not getting good intelligence because he's been told, and like most conservatives, the media can't ever tell the truth because they lied to us all during the war on terror, and they lied to us about this. So none of the conservatives can trust that what the media is saying about Russia is true now. And it is, because not because they're good people, because they're following orders. The orders now from the globalists is Russia's the bad guy, and that's the proper position. It is the bad guy. And they need to, take down Russia's conventional capability to make them wait till China's ready to start World War III. Russia can't start it. Russia can't start a nuclear. So can't occupy.
Right. What about why do we never want to go after people like Nancy Pelosi and oh gosh, what's her counterpart guy? I always forget his name.
Chuck Schumer?
Yeah, Chuck Schumer. In other words, we're going after some middlemen. Okay. Is that a strategic move? Or should we be going after the little guys first?
Well, look, they aren't going after anybody except firing, and nobody's gone to jail. And that's why a good portion
That's why I asked you if it was sincere.
A good portion of the Trump people are very upset with the DOJ, with Pam Bondi, because nobody's going to jail. But look, you got to understand that the NSA that has all the wiretaps, that would have the evidence of treason, have the evidence of their telephone conversations, runs the deep state, and they're not going to hand over that information to the DOJ. It's not, you can't throw people in jail for doing something that appears politically unless you get the wiretaps of showing them violating the intent of the law by weaponizing the law against innocent people. Then you could throw them in jail if you had the wiretaps.
Yeah.
But you're never going to get those because the NSA is still controlled by the deep state. At least the wiretap database is controlled. And Tulsi Gabbard doesn't understand, and neither does Ratcliffe, that you could go out to any of the 5 or 6 contractors that have copies of all of the wiretap information, because the deep state has farmed that out as a safeguard to make sure that it can't be compromised if Trump would come in and try to get the U.S. archives. But you could go in and subpoena that from Booz Allen Hamilton that Snowden worked for. It has all that data, and you could find that stuff that hasn't been purged.
Yeah.
So the Trump administration doesn't know what they're doing in this regard.
All right. How much time do you have left? Because I want to go deep for a
I've got
second
20
because
minutes.
I have been having so many people email me. You weren't here for a month or two. I don't know how long, 6 weeks or whatever. And people have so many questions. And I promise you, they want to know this. Okay. I don't think anything's weird. I don't think anything's off the table when it comes to asking you. When it comes to, I put out a couple videos recently about, I don't know, signs in the skies, uh, UFOs, things like that. When it comes to our national security or even top secret information, the CIA what's it called? Area 51?
Right.
Area 51, which I just recently drove by a few days ago, and all that good stuff. Do you believe that that we have made contact with other worlds? And I don't know how this relates to what we're talking about. Maybe it doesn't. But do you think that some of our technology came from other worlds? And are there real people, like you've heard of what are they called? The tall whites and these aliens that people say are real. Is that something that you think is legitimate?
Well, there's not a black and white answer to this, Troy, but there are some things that we can know from a gospel perspective, that we are living on an earth that is bound by Newtonian physics. In other words, in the spiritual realm, you have instantaneous travel, faster than the speed of light, instantaneous. You can have spiritual beings that are physical and that can shake your hand and then walk right out of a wall, through a wall, and go right through the wall in the spiritual or resurrected realm. Okay. Now, alien UFOs do exhibit these traits. They exhibit the violation of the law of inertia. They can be going thousands of miles an hour and make an instantaneous right hand turn without destroying those bodies up against the wall of a spacecraft. They can instantaneously go up and down and descend 3,000 feet. They can go underwater and come back up out of the water. I do not believe these are U.S. technology that we've got from aliens, because it would violate the test of this earth. Meaning, if we had technology that allowed for instantaneous time travel, et cetera, it violates the limitations that are on this earth for testing purposes. And so, in the Roswell incident, there are legitimate whistleblowers who have seen the alien bodies, and they don't look like us. They have humanoid characteristics, arms, legs, etc., but they have a different type of skin, different type of eyes. And
Do
I
you think
believe that
they're
that's
from
true.
our galaxy, or do you think they're from
Not,
our
not,
galaxy?
not, not necessarily. We don't know where they come from, but obviously they have ability to travel in the spiritual realm. So either one or two possibilities here. And by the way, a lot of people in Israel have seen what they call the Nephilim,
Mm-hmm.
or the large giant like, Goliath-sized people that can walk through
With the
walls, etc.
yeah, like
All
these
right.
red-headed giants in caves. Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
And so there have been a lot of, sightings of those types of things. And there are UFO sightings all the time that are legitimate. But I do not believe this is U.S. acquired technology from aliens, because it would violate the laws of physics. And I don't
Okay.
believe the Lord's going to allow that. However, what the indication of alien bodies are that are different humanoids means that either one of two things: that the universe is a free market whereby any intelligent entities are able to create their own bodily forms. We are created in the image of God. Um, And God controls this earth. And that's why none of those alien spacecraft or bodies have ever interfered with life. Now, that's important because that would mean that the Lord has control and says, you may visit, but you can't intervene. And if you can't interfere or intervene, that means you can't sit down with generals, as people have claimed, and have discussions with aliens and transfer technology that the Lord does not want to ability. Now, the other possibility is that these are spiritual entities with a shell that makes them look like a physical
I
being,
thought
etc.
the same thing, Joel. Kind of like Satan knows he couldn't have a body, so they got mortals to create android like or whoever to create something from the material world for them to possess. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Or create. In other words, you see, it's a free market. So if Satan can get other intelligent entities to form bodies and forms, then so much, I think he's allowed to do that for testing purposes. But the Lord still has a mandate you can't interfere with it. So that's the other possibility, that they are not actual different human forms, but are physical shells created by Satan, and they're still in the spirit world, and that's why they can go through walls and do right angle turns and have hyper speed type of thing, because they're still in the spiritual realm, not the physical.
Okay, wait. So you're saying that he's created something physical that's still in the spiritual laws of nature.
Well, the spacecraft were physical in the sense that they did crash and they didn't disappear. The U.S. took them away and stored it. So, uh, but the beings themselves, if they can exceed the laws of physics in terms of inertia and speed and acceleration, etc., may be in the spirit realm. But yes, obviously if my, and I'm only proposing this as an alternative
Of
theory to
course.
actual
Yeah.
aliens being in existence, but both are possible, because you see, a lot of Christians don't understand that the universe is a free market, that the reason God is because we all trust the system of justice and fairness that he has developed. But he has to convince other people. He hasn't convinced Satan, and Satan is, when he fails in this earth life to destroy as many people and get them to his, he's going to try to establish and call for other
His own
intelligent
colony
beings
somewhere. Yeah.
to colonize, etc. And
Right.
I think the Lord will always have the upper hand, because he
He follows
most
the laws of
intelligent
righteousness.
beings,
Yeah.
he follows the laws of justice, and people trust him. So, a lot of evangelicals believe that God is God. He can be arbitrary. He can be anything he wants because he's God. No, he can't. He can't be arbitrary. He can't play favorites. He can't give you talents and deny other people talent. He can't make people look good and make other people
He
look bad.
honors
He doesn't.
agency. Yeah.
That's right. He doesn't create those things. We create by free choice. What we look like is because of choices we made with our spiritual parents.
Yeah. I like that you said that he's not yes, he's all wise, all knowing, all powerful, and he knows what's going on in every corner of the universe, but he doesn't interfere with agency. So if in other words, what you're saying is there could be worlds and colonies and civilizations out there that are just doing their own thing, but they're in darkness. They're in spiritual darkness. They're not connected with, or maybe something intermediate. I don't know. Are you kind of saying when you say the universe is a free market, you're saying that God organizes matter, he does things, but if there's people that want to rebel and take off and do their own thing, he's not going to stop them.
That's right. In other words, he it's a constant missionary work among intelligent entities in the universe, convincing them, come to my system, which is just and fair, where you'll get the best potential of what you have. And there are other people like Satan calling them and saying, no, come where I will determine who's good, and I can give power to you, and I can, you who are rejected by the system of fairness, come to me and I will give you power, you see. Uh, and we will fight against you. But you see, I think there's always going to be conflict. Anybody who thinks that going up in the next life is going to be walking around on gold streets with pomegranate and
Bliss.
honey and everything.
Yeah.
No, no. The war in the universe is always going on. There's always a Satan. There's always satanic forces. There's always opposing forces. And God has the upper hand because he has built a system that has attracted the majority of good, intelligent spirits.
Wow. That's deep. And it's interesting, Joel, because I do get these questions. And folks, remember, we are theorizing. We're Joel doesn't have blueprints on what's going on in the universe. He's giving his best analysis that of things that you do know.
Well, I'm
Correct?
giving what must be true in order for God to be just, in order for God to be fair, and in order to manage a system, what must be true. And that's why I've come to those conclusions. He must not be dictating he must not be gifting to people, lest he be viewed as unfair, and he wouldn't have the same allegiance. You see, when it says that the glory of God is intelligence, it doesn't mean smarts. It means the glory of God is because intelligent entities give him honor because they agree with the system of justice. That's they give him glory because they're agreeing with the system of justice. And were he to begin to be arbitrary and capricious, he would not have the glory of intelligence. We would not honor him and we would desert him, you see. And that's
Right.
why God cannot do evil. He must and can only love truth and goodness.
Yeah, that's true. And I think okay, I know you what do you got 5 minutes left?
10 minutes.
Okay. So I know you're not a what's the word I'm looking for? Eschatologist. You don't get into end times prophecies and things like that. But you do know geography and you do know sociology and you know economics and you know politics and you
Well,
know
I know real life, and you see,
yeah, right.
I know the general trend of eschatology of the last days leading up to the second coming.
Well, you can
But
take that analysis. Go ahead, sorry.
every time I speak at the Firm Foundation, I get inundated with people who have written books claiming to know the beginning from the end and have figured out every one of Daniel's prophecies and Jonah and everyone else. And I look and read that material and just have to roll my eyes. I said, you just created this out of whole cloth. And the point is, my answer to them is none of this is necessary. You don't have to understand who the 10 kings are in Daniel's dream. You don't have to understand who the three kingdoms are. You don't have to know any of that because you still have to wait for it to happen. It
Right.
doesn't give you it doesn't give you any leg up on anything other than what I'm giving people in the world affairs brief, a realistic view of what war is coming, what that's going to do in the future, why you've got to prepare. I don't care when it comes, you just need to prepare. And when you see it coming, this is what the Lord meant by watching the fig trees and the leaves of summer as they begin to wither. And we're seeing those signs happen, and you don't have to know the details of those prophecies to prepare. You just, in fact, it inhibits that because if you think that I've got it wired and it's not going to happen to XYZ year and I don't have to prepare to then, you're going to be unprepared.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so much nuance in analogies and metaphors and the scriptures speak in hyperbole.
Because
Isaiah spoke so
they're setting
hyperbolically.
spiritual, yeah, setting spiritual traps, Troy.
Yeah.
The Lord could all of the clear prophecies, by the way, of prophets who saw everything in clear, without code, without symbolism, right up to the very end, were hidden up in the sealed portions of the Book of Mormon. Now, why would the Lord do that? Why does he leave Daniel and the other esoteric prophets who code everything open? Because he knows that there are intellectuals in Christianity and in Mormonism that will wear out their days trying to figure out those things, and it's a trap. There's people who write all kinds of books on numerology, about all kinds of books on symbolism, and I don't.
And some of those things could have already happened
Yeah, the point
2,000
is,
years ago.
I don't need them. What you've got to
Right.
do is open your eyes and see what's real in the world, what the real threats are, and then it will motivate you to prepare. And as I told my audience at the Firm Foundation, if I give you one iota of hope that Trump is going to be your savior, you will not prepare. And that's why I told them, I said, My books on preparedness and strategy have gone down by 2/3 since Trump's election. 2/3, because conservatives think that Trump is going to save them. It's not going to happen. Now, he
They
may delay certain things, he may improve certain things, but none of the existential threats have changed. The war threat is still there. In fact, it may be increased because of him not seeing the threat of Russia and trying to give him everything he wants in Ukraine, including all 5 provinces of the Donbass, even that he hasn't conquered. Trump wants to give it to him, to have peace at any cost. He wants to allow Putin to demand that Ukraine be disarmed, that have no more arms shipments. This is just capitulation.
And I think what you're saying is it's dangerous to fanboy any mortal. Do not
Yeah.
do that, okay? Because he's fallible. He's still a fallible man, and I think we've gotten to this hype and this hysteria, Trump hysteria, that conservatives have. And I'm not saying that I haven't voted for him, and I'm sure you did too. I don't know who you voted for, but
No,
the
I wouldn't vote for a Democrat, of course not. I
right,
voted for myself. I voted for myself. I was running for president under the Constitution.
right. That's right. I forgot. Sorry. But it is dangerous to put any human being on a pedestal and say that they are some kind of they have superhero powers, and that they're going to be a savior for us nationally, internationally, and they're going to clean house. I think he's a good man. Like, I think he's sincere, but he's got people that are, like you said, the Nikki Haley's and the uh, who was the other guy that was in his last administration. We're going to see those things happen again. They're going to start exposing themselves as rhinos. Okay, one more question, and then I'll let you go. Would you say most of our rhinos are deep state, or like you said, some of them are and some of them aren't?
Well, yeah, it's not that easy to classify. Remember that to really be part of a deep state, they have to have blackmailable offenses on you. So you have to have cheated on your wife. Better yet, they want you to be stressful or something, egregious that they can hold over you. In terms of illegal acts as well, they give immunity for illegal acts. So you've got to have a lot of them in order to have them have a chain hold around your neck. So there's a lot of rhinos you see that are simply people who lack courage to fight against the establishment. And you take Mitt Romney, for example. I mean, Mitt Romney is a real rhino Republican, but I don't think he was deep state. I don't think he's cheated on his wife. I think he, pushed the limits in his financial dealings with Bain Capital, etc. But this guy really wants to be popular among the establishment. So did Orrin Hatch.
Yeah.
He sold us down the river as conservatives because he wanted to be popular with the establishment. He wasn't a rhino. Uh, there are some rumors about some indiscretions that he did, etc., which may be true, but I just don't know for sure. But all I
Oh, I
can
was thinking
say
of
is,
Pompey. That was the other guy. Sorry, Pompey.
oh, you mean Mike Pompeo?
Pompeo. Sorry,
Yeah,
Pompeo.
Mike Pompeo's deep state. Now, you can't get to be, other than Ratcliffe under the Trump, but you can't get heretofore head of the CIA without being actual deep state. And he knew why and how Trump was assassinated and told Trump, and Trump was never revealed what Mike
Right.
Pompeo told him.
But you don't think
But Mike
Ratcliffe is?
Pompeo's deep state.
You don't think Ratcliffe is, though?
No, no, no.
Okay. All right, Joel. Thank you so much for aliens and deep state stuff and all the goodies that everybody craves to hear with their tickling ears. I'm joking. Anyway, come back again. I'll see you later and have a good day.
All right. Thank you, Troy.
Okay, bye bye.